Have you ever felt like your greatest mistake, the one you truly regret, is living rent-free in your parents' memory? You apologize. You learn your lesson. Years pass. And yet, there it is. That story. That specific instance of teenage foolishness or young adult misstep that comes up right when you are feeling confident about your future. It is a story told not with venom, but with a strange mix of resigned disappointment and cautionary warning. Why can they not just let it go? Why does the past feel so permanent to them? While we listen to the story, we will also learn some new words, especially words that help us understand the difference between memory and intention, and the powerful meaning of parental assurance. Ethan was 18 years old, built strong by the salt air and the restless ocean near his home in coastal Oregon. He had dreams that stretched farther than the 12 miles of highway leading to the nearest large town. But every time he wanted to set sail toward those dreams, whether it was applying for an expensive university or investing time in a risky entrepreneurial idea, the shadow fell. That shadow was the great surfboard incident. 3 years prior, Ethan, feeling invincible and perhaps a little arrogant, had taken his father's prized possession, an antique, hand-shaped longboard. It was an irreplaceable piece of surfing history, valued at nearly $1,000. But to his dad, Henry, it was priceless. Henry had warned Ethan dozens of times not to take it out in high tide. Ethan ignored the warning. He hit a submerged rock shelf 50 feet offshore and snapped the board clean in half. The sound was sickening, a crack of splintering wood that echoed the crack in the relationship he shared with his father. Now, years later, the incident was Henry's go-to parable. When Ethan wanted to buy a used truck for college, remember the longboard, Ethan? You said you knew the currents then, too. When Ethan talked about starting a small landscaping business, a big investment for someone who misjudged a 2-foot wave, Ethan was exhausted. He felt like his attempts at growth were always measured against a wooden tombstone floating in the Pacific Ocean. One breezy Saturday, Ethan escaped the house and walked down to the small boatyard run by Mr. George. Mr. George was a man whose hands always smelled of pine tar and sea salt. He had spent 60 years patching and restoring the tough fishing vessels that weathered the rough Pacific waters. He was currently working on a 40-foot hull, scraping away decades of paint. Ethan sat on an overturned bucket, watching the painstaking process. He felt compelled to confess his frustration. "Mr. George," Ethan sighed, "how do you make something old new again? How do you make the scars disappear?" Mr. George stopped scraping, took a slow, deep breath, and pointed his tool at a section of the hull. It was a section that looked strangely smooth, but was subtly discolored. "See this?" Mr. George asked. "This boat. She took on water, bad in the great storm of '89. Nearly sunk 20 miles out. We got her back, but she had a terrible tear right here." Ethan leaned in. He could not see a tear. "Exactly," Mr. George said, reading Ethan's confusion. "You can't see the hole, but I know it's there. The memory of that failure, that weakness, that near sinking, that's permanent. The wood remembers." He explained that the process of repair was not about erasure. It was about reassurance. "When a boat is properly repaired, son, we don't remove the damaged wood," Mr. George continued, his voice low and gravelly. "We fill the gap with the strongest resin. We seal the seams with new fortified caulking. We don't forget the spot of failure, because that spot is now the location of our greatest vigilance. It is the place we check first, before the next rough journey." He scraped away a tiny bit of paint from the repaired section. "This repair isn't for the boat, Ethan. It's for the captain. It's a constant visual note that says, this boat survived its worst moment. It is stronger now because of the care taken to fix it." Mr. George looked directly at Ethan, sensing the boy's internal struggle. "Your dad, he remembers the broken board. But listen closely to how he tells the story. He is not just telling you about the break. He is telling himself about the repair. Ethan felt a sudden, profound shift in understanding. He reminds me of the mistake, Ethan whispered. No, he reminds you of the risk you survived, Mr. George corrected gently. He is reminding himself of the pain he felt watching you fall, and the profound vulnerability of realizing he couldn't stop it. He brings up the memory not as a punishment, but as a clumsy form of preventative maintenance. He is checking your seams to make sure you are still strong and secured before you sail out again. Later that evening, Ethan found his father polishing an old trophy in the living room. Instead of shrinking from the impending shadow, Ethan brought up the subject himself. "Dad," Ethan said, sitting down, "tell me about the longboard again." Henry looked surprised. "What about it, son? I know I broke it. I know it was stupid and selfish. But why do you keep telling that story? What is the memory for you?" Henry put down the trophy. He looked small for a moment, stripped of his parental armor. "That board," Henry admitted, his voice barely audible. "It was the last physical gift your grandfather gave me before he passed away. When you broke it, I saw two things shatter. I saw a piece of my own past, gone forever. And worse, I saw how close you came to getting seriously hurt in that tide. The cost wasn't the $800, Ethan. The cost was the fright. The fear that I hadn't taught you enough about respect for the ocean. Or maybe that I couldn't protect you from yourself." Henry paused, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "When I tell the story now," he confessed, "I'm not trying to punish you. I'm trying to assure myself that you learned enough to handle the next big wave. I'm just being a clumsy father, using a painful memory to say, be careful. I love you, and I can't bear the thought of losing you to a reckless mistake." Ethan finally understood. The board was never the problem. The constant reminder was Henry's awkward, lifelong pledge of parental assurance. The reason parents find it so difficult to stop retelling old mistakes lies in the concept of lasting impact and preventative love. When we, as children, make errors, we experience the immediate consequence: the shame, the lost privilege, the disappointment. We move on. But for a parent, the consequence is often absorbed internally. They absorb the financial cost, the emotional pain, and the terrifying fear that they failed in their primary mission: protecting you. When a parent repeats the story of the mistake, they are doing two things simultaneously. First, they are affirming the value of the repair. They are celebrating, in a strange, backward way, that you got past the incident and are still sailing. Second, they are performing a necessary act of emotional preservation, reminding themselves and you that vigilance is required because the stakes are always high. It is not a desire to punish you with memory. It is a profound need to protect you with the historical record. They remember the vulnerability the mistake revealed, and they desperately want to ensure that vulnerability is secured and guarded before you face the world's next inevitable storm. It takes tremendous empathy to see the parent not as a judge, but as a deeply loving, worried historian of your growth. Remember this powerful truth: the greatest legacy we can leave our children is not a debt-free life, but a well-mended spirit, capable of facing the memories that made them stronger. The next time you hear that familiar story about that mistake, pause. Don't just hear the memory of the broken board. Hear the whisper of assurance behind it. Hear the fear that you might forget the lesson. Hear the clumsy declaration of love that says, "I saw you at your weakest, and I invested everything in making sure you are unbreakable now." Embrace the narrative as a sign that you are deeply loved, perhaps too much, but always loved. I'll be back again with another inspiring story. Till then, be patient, be thankful, and keep moving forward in life.